The 2020 NBA Western Conference Finals. The matchup between two heavyweights, two super teams playing in the most anticipated playoff series all season long. LeBron James and Anthony Davis vs. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. This is going to be amazing. Wait. Oh. While the Nuggets came back from a 3-1 deficit again, the Clippers utterly collapsed. Kawhi and especially Paul George looked absolutely terrible in the clutch. Doc Rivers became the only coach in NBA history to blow a 3-1 series lead in 3 different playoff series. 2 of those times were with the Clippers. Looks like the ghost of Blake Griffin is still haunting them. Like, do you remember how we used to mock them back in the day when they had Blake and CP3? How they couldn't get past the second round, and how the Clippers franchise is cursed and are destined to fail? Every time something good happened, an untimely injury or a series of chokes would wake us up and remind us that they're still the Clippers. Even with the addition of Kawhi and PG, they somehow flew under the radar for most of the regular season, then floundered when it mattered the most. So they sure haven't done a good job shaking off that Clippers curse. Despite having their best roster since Bob MacLeod was there, we really thought this was the year they'd make their first ever appearance in the conference finals. Alas, that still did not happen. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, let's do a full breakdown of what went wrong in the series and problems with this team that people don't talk about much. And in the second part of the video, we'll cover the future of this team and where do they go from here. So, what did go wrong? Well, first off, we gotta stress the importance of pace. I mentioned this as the main reason why the Bucks lost to the Heat in a previous video, but it was even more apparent in this series. Pace dictates everything. Pace determines which team is controlling the flow of the game. In this case, it was the Nuggets. They're actually one of the slowest teams in the league. In fact, they were 29th out of 30 teams in pace during the regular season, yet they also had a top 5 offensive rating. What this means is that they are almost exclusively a half-court team, and operate their entire offense through a meticulous game plan, primarily around their 2 best players, Jokic and Murray. They're so good because during the playoffs, the game slows down and always benefits the slower team. The Clippers, on the other hand, were top 8 in pace, and they're used to getting out and running. But scoring in transition is an unreliable part of the playoffs because you rarely get the chance to go out and run the break. Essentially, that part of their game plan has gotten nullified, just like what happened to the Bucks. Throughout the series, it was very, very slow, a pace of 93.7, which heavily favored the Nuggets. That's their style and they're used to it. They don't care if the game slows down because that's what they do. They dominate in the half court. Now, to be fair, this was a 7-game series, so it's not like the Clippers were terrible the entire time. For the most part, they played how they usually play, but it was quite clear some players were uncomfortable. Specifically, Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell. These 2 guys were the X factors, and the success of the team seriously relied on them to perform like the 6th man candidates they're supposed to be. Offensively, athletically, they should have given the Nuggets a rough time, but instead, they got handled. While defense is not a strong point for Denver, their rotations, their ball denial, their collapsing in the paint in the pick and rolls, and pressuring of the ball handler severely hampered Williams and Harrell. As a result, both of them drastically underperformed, and the numbers show it, especially for Lou. This was the Nuggets' game plan to limit all of their role players while forcing Kawhi to do it all by himself. Here are some clips. You can tell how disciplined the Nuggets are on defense. Every single screen, every high pick and roll was covered very nicely, especially in the last 3 games of the series. Every time someone catches the ball in the paint, they see multiple bodies. Whether it's Zubats or Harrell, they get locked down. Every time Kawhi drives into the paint, he sees multiple defenders. Multiple players took turns guarding him. But for the most part, it was Jeremy Grant, the unsung hero. And when Kawhi does drive past him, he sees a very quick double team, usually a guy coming from the wing to help out. The mid-range elbow jumper is Kawhi's bread and butter, and the Nuggets knew that. So they tried as hard as possible to prevent that shot. While the Clippers are a great all-around team, very strong and solid from top to bottom, they developed into an isolation-heavy offense. Because the Nuggets' defense was so tight, the Clips had no other choice. Kawhi himself talked about these bad habits and explained, "A few easy ones didn't fall early, and that was it from there, pretty much. We got into a lot of ISO basketball once we got ourselves into that hole." When you see their offense stalling or struggling to convert, it's even more apparent. Because they just throw the ball to Kawhi or Paul George and watch them do their thing. Oh, and speaking of Paul George, Playoff P has become way off P. We all know how inconsistent his jump shot is. Arguably the most inconsistent star and biggest underperformer of the playoffs in recent years. Seriously, how do you go 4 of 16 in Game 7? I know Kawhi did not play well either, but it's way more rare to see Kawhi have a bad game. For George, it almost seems like he plays poorly every other playoff game. You could see that in the series against Dallas. On the other hand, the Nuggets' offense looked so much better due to how diverse their game plan is. Yes, they do run most of it through Jokic and Murray, but there's a ton of off-ball movement that you don't see with LA. In fact, for the past 4 seasons, the Nuggets have been top 5 in total assists per game. There's a stark difference between how fluid they look as opposed to how rigid the Clippers look. So, where do the Clippers go from here? The thing is, I don't see their style of play changing. This is just how Kawhi and Paul George play. Both of them are incredible two-way players, but neither of them can run the offense or pass at an elite level. We're going to see more of this rigid, ISO-heavy offense as long as both of them remain. The biggest concern is the Clippers' complacency towards their coach, Doc Rivers. Most of the time, when a team underperforms, it's usually the coach that gets the blame. However, this time, that doesn't seem to be the case. According to an article from Chris Haynes, he stated, "Rivers is rightfully being criticized for his lack of adjustments in the series, but discourse on his job status is premature at the moment. Playing for Rivers was a major component in Leonard joining the Clippers. Rivers will be running it back next season," sources said. To add on to this, the Clippers losing was such a letdown. Extremely surprising, yet they probably deserve it. Haynes added on, "The Clippers rubbed opposing teams the wrong way by publicly voicing that their time is now, and taking games and practices off in the regular season, believing they could just turn it on when it mattered the most because of their abundance of depth. But the most hyped Clippers team in history failed to produce when it was time." Doc Rivers gets praised around NBA circles, but I think he's been overrated for a while. Most of his glory and reputation he's holding on to is strictly from his 2008 run with the Celtics. But since then, what has he done? At this point, it's all reputation. Most Clippers fans actually knew this for a long time, but this time, with their new stars, it'll be different, right? Well, that didn't work out. It's hard to say they'll have a bad future considering how much sheer talent is on the roster, so they're always gonna be in the running as title contenders. But looking at their contract situation, their payroll, and all that stuff, they don't have much to work with either, with over $100 million on the books until 2022, including Pat Beverley's ridiculous salary. Doc has to go, but it seems like the front office likes him too much. It's a tough situation, but they need a serious revamp of their offense. Doc has been there for a long time, but he's not the guy for that. Even in the past, with Blake Griffin and Chris Paul and JJ Redick, DeAndre Jordan, they were so talented from top to bottom, but still had a reputation for underachieving. This loss to Denver, while it might have seemed bad, it was a culmination of everything going on. Let me know your thoughts on the Clippers and what can they realistically do in the future. Can this team, with its current personnel, win a title? That's what we thought before when Kawhi and Paul George came along, but they got exposed. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.